victims. And just yesterday, two men claiming they were sexually assaulted by the former sports doctor are hoping for a change in the leadership means more school accountability. Now, from the 1960s to the early 2000s, hundreds of students accused Dr. Robert Anderson of sexually abusing them. Tuesday, U of M graduates Robert Stone and Keith Morey say they are survivors. Morey reported the abuse and was promised by the school Anderson would be fired. Instead, he remained.
We now know how this played out. Robert Anderson was never removed from his medical oversight of students, and in fact, was shuffled to a position with even more power and control over students.
Despite their frustrations, the two men hope after the weekend firing of President Mark Schlissel, the school will take more accountability for what he calls a lack of action.
Regent said he had an inappropriate relationship with an employee. Former President Mary Sue Coleman has taken over while the board looks for a permanent replacement. Robert Stone and Keith Morey graduated in the 70s and early 80s, and both say administrators did nothing when they came forward about Anderson's abuse.
We go to the extreme example of a Dr. Anderson, which is very, very different than what ex-President Schlissel was being accused of. But they're sort of along the same continuum of what happens when people are made untouchable. And that's part of the culture that has to change.
If this continues, a degree from the University of Michigan is just going to be an embarrassment. And it's going to take a real change in attitude among the Board of Regents to turn this around.
Lawyers for the school are in mediation right now, trying to settle lawsuits from more than 1,000 of Anderson's accusers.
University of Michigan are hoping new leadership at the school will bring about change. Keith Morey and Robert Stone say the school is ready for a culture change as the university's board looks for a new president. The board removed U of M President Mark Schlissel this week due to an alleged inappropriate relationship with a university employee. The two men say they hope the firing will let the school be more accountable towards abuse victims. They say former university doctor Robert Anderson abused them decades ago.
She would give him jail time if she could for not keeping up his yard. Supporters have also started a Launch Good campaign to help the family pay for medical and home expenses. Two men who say they were sexually assaulted by a former sports doctor, Robert Anderson, at the University of Michigan, are hoping that the change in leadership will allow the school to be more accountable towards abuse victims. Keith Morey, along with Robert Stone, say the school is in need of a culture change.
I think in some ways there needs to be a Truth and Reconciliation Committee to really, first of all, look at what's been going on there. Let's get this out in the open, really know what we're dealing with, take the hard knocks, and then move forward together. And that's going to be a president with a lot of skill in terms of working with people and listening.
A board is conducting a search to permanently replace Mark Schlissel, who was removed over the weekend due to an alleged inappropriate relationship with a university employee. WWJ News Time is 4:00.
Its emergency rules, and it says that it will affirm every action it did, including the firing of the president, at a February 17th meeting. Charlie Langton, WWJ News Radio, 950.
Two men who say they were sexually assaulted by former sports doctor Robert Anderson at the University of Michigan are speaking out after the firing of President Mark Schlissel. Robert Stone, along with Keith Morey, says he has seen no commitment to change from the university.
It is a culture of duplicity and a dual standard. One thing applies to everybody else, and those who are tenured have another set of rules, regardless of what the written procedures may be.
Schlissel was fired over the weekend due to an alleged inappropriate relationship with a subordinate at the university. The university's Board of Regents is conducting a search for his permanent replacement.
Changes at the university. Sherry?
Robert Stone was one of the first to come forward with his story, helping to bring Anderson's years of preying on students into the spotlight. He says the university has learned nothing since then and continues to not take responsibility for what they allowed for decades.
Robert Stone was a 20-year-old University of Michigan student when he says he was sexually assaulted by Dr. Robert Anderson during a medical exam. At the time of the assault, Anderson was U of M's physician.
I was full of anger and full of disgust. I couldn't imagine that anyone would do that to another human being. It still kind of boggles my mind now.
In 2019, Stone shared the story of what happened to him. Since then, hundreds of other victims have also come forward. Stone says U of M has continued to not fully accept responsibility, even after a report detailed not only the years of sexual abuse by Anderson, but also failings by university employees who could have stopped the abuse.
At every point in this process, when there was an important decision to be made by the university, they made the wrong one.
Last July, U of M overhauled its sexual misconduct policies, implemented mandatory reporting, and changed how officials address allegations. Saturday, University President Mark Schlissel was fired for breaking the same rule he implemented last summer.
How could anyone be so stupid to abuse their position in the way he did at the very moment he is denying restitution to the victims and proclaiming his support for the newly enforced university policy?
In prior statements about Anderson, U of M said it condemns all sexual misconduct, whether it takes place now or took place in the past. It is unacceptable. Sherry Hardman, ABC 12 News.
Sherry, thank you. Michigan State Legislature considering bills aimed at giving Dr. Anderson's victims a window to sue the school for damages. The bills would allow a 30-day period for more than 1,000 victims of his abuse to file a lawsuit against U of M, regardless of the statute of limitations. The university would not be able to use the government immunity defense. Similar legislation was enacted after former Michigan State University team Dr. Larry Nassar was convicted of molesting hundreds of girls and women. Survivors of both doctors will rally on the steps of Michigan's Capitol building Thursday in support of the legislation. Stay with ABC 12 News for continuing coverage.
That crash.
Two men who say a former sports doctor at the University of Michigan sexually assaulted them say they hope a change in leadership will lead to more accountability. Keith Morey and Robert Stone say the school needs a culture change as its board conducts a search to replace fired President Mark Schlissel. Schlissel was fired Saturday due to an alleged inappropriate relationship with a university employee.
With a new president in place, the university has a fresh opportunity to make restitution to those it has harmed, to replace a culture of hypocrisy at the highest levels with one of centering student well-being.
Both Stone and Morey say Dr. Robert Anderson targeted gay men at a time when many were hesitant or afraid to acknowledge their sexual orientation. Litigation amid allegations of sexual abuse by Anderson has been underway for decades.
School is going to bring about change. Keith Moore and Robert Stone say the school is ready for a culture change at the university's board as the university's board looks for a new president. The board, as you know, removed U of M President Mark Schlissel just this week due to an alleged inappropriate relationship with a university employee. The two men say they hope that firing will let the school be more accountable towards abuse victims. They say former university Dr. Robert Anderson abused them decades ago. WMU football coach Tim Lester.
His job, they are speaking out about the culture on campus. Here's Fox 2's Jessica Dupnack.
50 years later, I'm still carrying this anger.
Robert Stone, the first to publicly come forward in 2020, accusing disgraced University of Michigan doctor Robert Anderson of sexual assault. He died in 2008. The details too vile and perverse for TV.
This is a Dr. Frankenstein. And these are the kinds of things that went on that you don't know about because the university would not commit to transparency.
Stone and another survivor, Keith Morey, spoke out via teleconference Tuesday against the university and its region's continued mishandling of Dr. Anderson's abuse that went on for decades against athletes and gay men.
I likely was abused because I just come out to Dr. Anderson as a gay man.
This days after the university president, Mark Schlissel, who is married, was fired for an affair with a subordinate.
My overall reaction to the entire episode can be encapsulated in 3 words. What a pig.
So far, hundreds of men have come out against Anderson. It prompted U of M to hire Washington, D.C.-based law firm WilmerHale, which found
dozens of University of Michigan employees were alerted through the decades to the actions of Robert Anderson.
And that when survivors like Morey reported Anderson to university higher-ups, Anderson kept practicing.
Of course, we now know how this played out. Robert Anderson was never removed from his medical oversight of students, and in fact, was shuffled to a position with even more power and control over students.
A statement from U of M says in part the university is going to extraordinary measures to put critical protections in place on top of earlier protections. We continue to work with the nationally recognized consulting firm of Guidepost Solutions on additional measures. Reporting in Ann Arbor, Jessica Dupnack, Fox.
Robert Stone was the first to come out against Dr. Robert Anderson nearly 2 years ago. He, like dozens since, claims Anderson sexually abused him. Many of Anderson's survivors were athletes. Others, like Stone and Keith Morey, were gay students.
Robert Anderson was a chronic serial sexual predator who exploited any power differential he could find. Many of Anderson's earliest victims at the University of Michigan were gay men, at a time when being outed could have grave consequences.
They say they are still just the tip of the iceberg.
So many people have come forward and told their stories, but many people have not. I know of people who still have not spoken out because of shame, embarrassment.
And that shame and embarrassment will keep people from speaking up. The university is yet to do anything about it. And with the recent scandal and termination of the university's president, Stone and Morey are increasing their pleas.
It's transparently clear to anyone who wants to pay attention that there's no commitment to change because the president of the university couldn't stop himself from having his own affair that was against their written rules.
A new president could bring a new insight and new compassion these alums are seeking.
I think this is an opportunity for the university to really do the right thing.
Eric